Welcome to Careers in Accounting. Today, we're pleased to have Phil Castor. Phil is a PwC audit partner joining us today. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So maybe we can start with how did you become interested in accounting and began your career?
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but frankly, lucked into it a little bit. I was at a small school, and part of the business curriculum there, I was going to get a business degree and was to take an accounting class. I got into the intro to accounting class and really actually liked it and a lot. And got fortunate enough to get to know the professor a little bit because I was, wanted to get a sense for what kind of careers do you have in accounting? You got the old stereotypical guy's got a little shingle and does a bunch of tax returns, and I'm like, I definitely don't want to do that. But what else can I do, right? And so the guy coached me up a little bit and got me enough interested in what these firms can do. I did a lot of research on my own, and I'm like, wow, these firms are, and I was particularly interested in audit. Thought I was anyway, and they audit, and they're involved with all these great Fortune 500 companies and all that kind of stuff. And then I did enough research to know that, hey, gosh, if you stay there a little bit and get some good experience, it seems like the people that leave do very well when they leave. So it was kind of all of that. All those considerations got me, into the career, but I had no idea I would stay as long as I have.
Yeah, I think my experience was as well. I thought a CPA, noble profession, never saw an unemployed CPA. So it seemed like that was appealing to me as well. And I also thought maybe a couple years and then I'll get my credential and then I'll be on to something else. So you've decided to stay. You've been at PwC for a number of years.
Yep.
What are some things that you find fulfilling about and what led you to stay?
Yeah, so I think that when I think about that, I think there's, a couple things. One, I do think, importantly, I do think it's a pretty noble profession. I like what we do. And when you're involved in it, you do realize how many things that you find to help companies get their financials correct, to improve their processes, to validate their reporting. And again, if something goes bad, right, you'll see that in the Wall Street, and that certainly happens. But what doesn't get reported is the number of times that we actually step up and help the capital markets, help our clients. And so it's very rewarding work for sure, number one. But probably the second, and if not the first, is I just like working with young people. And the thing that's great about our practice, right, when you think about it, the only old people in the firm are people like me, and that's very few. Like the average age of our audit practice firm-wide in the U.S. is about 27 and a half. So there is a level of energy in my environment that's just totally different than my clients. Like when I talk to a CFO of a client, I interact with CFOs a lot, right? And if they have a project come up, they always talk about how they're resource constrained. And lots of times they're coming to us to help fill that. And lots of times I'm like, I can't believe you don't have the resources to do this. And he goes, look, I've got one or two go-to people. And if they're busy, the rest of these people sitting out here have kind of settled into a job. They're no longer interested in a career, but they're valuable people to us, but they just kind of do what they do. In my environment, I walk out of my office and there's 20 people standing there. Everybody wants to help because they're younger, they're starting their career, and being able to coach and mentor and shape those folks. And again, as we've talked about before, most of those people aren't going to stay with us long term, but you still have an unbelievably valuable experience helping shape their careers and get them onto a career path that works for them. So the energy level in my environment is, I think, unique to public accounting versus, or maybe it's public accounting consulting. It's unique compared to my clients, and these are world-class companies.
Yeah, wonderful. One of the stereotypes of the profession is it's repetitive. It's same as last year, very redundant. When I say those words to you, what comes to mind in your experience?
Yeah, so what's interesting, I totally get why people would think that, right? And the young people, they hear from the, like if you've got a person that's going to graduate and go into the profession, they've likely got a friend that's in year 1 or 2, right? And those are the people that they're talking to. And certainly there's a level of detailed work that you got to do in those first couple of years. It's probably not as exciting as the work you're going to do later, right? But it's never really repetitive. Clients are constantly changing as their business model changes, if they buy a company, sell a company, anything changes, put in a new IT system. These companies are changing all the time. The audit and the way we approach doing it has to change and be responsive to any of those changes. And so the fact that the clients are changing by definition means, our stuff is changing all the time as well. And the other good thing that's happened a lot, two good things. One, COVID was not a great thing for the country and for sure, right? But we did figure out that you don't have to sit in an office to do the work. You don't have to sit at the client site. The technology works, and our clients figured that out too. So there's now a level of flexibility that also is a change, right? And so when you have to figure out how to interact, some clients are different, right? So you're constantly figuring out what's the routine with this client. So early on in your career, you have some clients that you're on site more, and others want to do it remotely more, and so it's constantly changing as the clients are changing with that. But in conjunction with that, in order to get all this work done, we started to use what we call acceleration centers, but it's a fancy way to say offshore resources. And so we do that in places like India and Mexico, and those people do a lot of the detail work. They're cheaper, number one. Our clients demand us to be cost effective, and as they've offshored stuff, they expect us to do that too. So earlier in your career, you're now supervising that work as opposed to doing it. So that's really made a big change, I think, for younger people in the firm. So they're not having to do all this detail work. They have to make sure it gets done.
Yeah.
They have to know enough about it, but you're supervising it versus doing it, which I think is more rewarding.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier that the purpose you find in the work, and I similarly thought of that in my career, is that you're trying to help and facilitate the company run their business, right? At the end of the day, and they may be global in nature. A lot of your clients are global in nature. And so the whole world's constantly changing, the United States and the political environment. And so you're really just trying to help these companies, stay on side of the rules, but do their job, do their business, and that type of thing. So that's very fascinating on that front. Can you talk about a couple interesting projects you worked on recently that maybe would be out of the norm?
Yeah, so I think probably, and it might not totally be out of the norm, but any kind of capital transaction. So a lot of companies are refinancing debt, or they might be spinning off a company. And so I recently worked on my client in Detroit, Borg Warner, did a spinoff recently, but they were trying to do it in a 9-month period of time, which is very, very difficult to do, but that's what they wanted to do. So just to be able to have the firm and my team and the resources we were able to marshal together to achieve that. So you had to do a separate audit of the subsidiary that was buried in this company, and that subsidiary had locations everywhere too. Now, fortunately, we have teams in virtually everywhere we needed them, so we went to the same people that we typically would go to and say, "Hey, we've got this added work." But the auditing itself, I'm not suggesting that was so great, but it facilitated a very transformative transaction for the company. And so the company was ecstatic with it. The board of directors were ecstatic with it. The capital markets have reacted well. So the role that we played in that and seeing all that happen is very, very rewarding. The other thing that's very interesting now is European companies are now going to have to do a bunch of ESG reporting. And we're going to, it's phased, but we're going to start with limited assurance, and then eventually it'll turn into the level of assurance that is reasonable assurance, which is what you do in an audit. But this is, it's companies are very good now with the financial statements, right? But when you talk about, and there's a lot of similarities between accumulating like greenhouse gas emissions information or use of resource information, right? Like that concept is pretty simple, but to be able to have the processes in place to do it in a way that it can be audited and stand the scrutiny of an audit, companies aren't really prepared for that. So we're spending a lot of time now working on that, which is totally unrelated to the financial statement audit, but the skill set that's required to be able to do it falls right into our department, right? And so we're spending a lot of time on that. It's totally different stuff. It's very interesting how the companies are approaching it and how they're getting their resources together and how we're interacting with them. So it's totally unrelated to the financial statements. It'll be a part of the financial statement disclosures, but it's a whole new area. And so just figuring out, going into manufacturing plants and figuring out, how do you collect this information? Can it be audited? Okay, currently it can't. So here's what you're going to need to do. So it's very interesting work.
And your spinoff example is fascinating when you mentioned that to me, because there's a tax element to that as well, and it's one of the more strictly scrutinized transactions from a tax perspective for the government. And the idea that you mentioned of separating these businesses around the globe is easy said, hard to do. And not just the accounting firm, but the accountants that work at the company
right.
are intimately involved in that, of unwinding that and getting this to be a separate company ready to be owned separately and run separately. That's just an immense undertaking.
Well, it really is. And the other thing that's it, there's also especially when you do it that quickly. Now they had been talking about it for a little while, but they really hadn't been actively doing it. So to try to do it that
Yeah.
quickly, it puts a lot of strain on everybody. But what most importantly too, you're dealing with the client, and some people are like, well, which company am I gonna? So there's a whole personal dynamic within the company that you're having to work yourself around too, which
Yeah.
we're always the byproduct of what might be going on personnel wise in a
Yeah.
company, right? If they're making changes or whatever. But I had a bunch of people worried about, am I going to have a job, and if I do, which company? And so at the same time, we're trying to get a bunch of work out of them so that we can do our work.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting dynamics. But the tax thing is that obviously we spent a lot of time with that, and our international tax group supported that process. And to your point, though, it's like if you don't get that right, all of a sudden you got this tax bill that nobody can
Yeah.
afford to
Yeah.
pay.
Disaster, career
So
limiter.
yeah, it's totally a disaster,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a point about how we have to work with all the disciplines within our firm
Yes.
on an audit too. So that's also, I think, a thing that people forget. Like the tax team is a big part of our audit team. They may be doing some very unique tax stuff, but obviously there's a tax provision in those financials, and we don't have the expertise to, no matter how much you've been around, I don't know the international tax laws. And so they've got transactions happening everywhere, and our tax team has to help us do that, and our IT team has to help us. So there's a lot of collaboration from different groups that go into an audit for sure.
Fantastic. One of the elements you and I know about is the opportunities that come your way by starting your accounting career in public accounting. And so, can you talk a little bit about either instances you've seen where a colleague has left and done great things outside of public accounting, or maybe opportunities that have come your way personally?
Yeah, sure. So I think, and you've just hit on my sales pitch that I give every student that I interview to potentially come to work for PwC. And I'm like, look, you're gonna, the firm's great, and it's gonna, and we're gonna work you a little bit. There's good work-life balance, but we're gonna work you a little bit. We're good, but we're gonna train you, and we're gonna teach you, and we're gonna expose you to business, and we're going to expose you to people, allow you to build out your network. And I said, frankly, what's going to happen in 5 or 6 years, you'll be very valuable outside of the firm, and you'll have a network that'll allow you to, access that and to figure out, is this something I want to do? That is the best part about public accounting, is the work's good, but you'll build out a network and you'll figure out what you really want to do. And I think I've said this before, but we survey everybody that why they're working for us to figure out what they like and don't like, and when they leave, we do exit interviews and figure that out. And 90% of the people that leave, they were happy at PwC, but they figured out what they wanted to do. They figured out the industry that really got them excited, and they figured out the type of company, whether it's a small entrepreneurial company or a large public. And so you learn so much, right? And you get so many opportunities. And so we've all had those opportunities, and I just never found anything that I felt was going to give me the same work-life balance and the same level of interaction. Again, I go back to young people, the same, I just never felt like these companies were great, but I kind of felt like after about 5 years I was going to be kind of an old guy sitting in an office with a bunch of other old guys and gals, right? Like I was really worried about losing the connectivity to the younger folks, which I like to spend my time with. So that's why I stayed. But if you want to look at a good example here in St. Louis, Missouri, just look over at Ameren, which is our utility here in town. The chairman of the board, who I think just finally retired, Warner Baxter, was a former St. Louis PW guy when he started. He was sold. It was before the merger. Okay. And then you've got the current CEO, Marty Lyons, was a PwC partner and then left and went to Ameren. And then the CFO is Michael Main, who is also a PwC partner. So the entire C-suite over at Ameren is made up of former auditors from our firm, right? And so, and all those people left at different stages. Most of them stayed. I think the youngest one that left would have been with us 9 or 10 years. But at the end of the day, they worked on that account. They got excited, believe it or not, about a regulated industry, but they got excited about it. They loved it. It was their passion. And they had an entry into that company at a level that pretty much assured them long-term success there. And that's the other key thing, is when you get the experience we give our kids in 5 or 6 years, that's like 10 years in
Yeah.
the business world. So when they leave, they're going to leave for a really good job that gets them into the organization at the right level, so that if they do
Yeah.
good things, it's visible and they'll have the opportunities they need
And
there.
they're going eyes wide open as
Eyes
to
wide open.
what they want and from the company and then the climate and everything. So my example I like to share with people, and I know you know him, is Tad. Tad Fowler was a partner at PwC, and he worked on a large merger acquisition for a number of years, one of the largest ones at that point in time. And as tend to happen in those types of transactions, they get to know you, you get to know them,
Right.
and they talk to you about, why don't you come and work for us? And so he left as a partner and went to work for them, and now he's the treasurer. He's of a top 5 consumer product company in the world.
Yeah.
It's just amazing where these people end up,
Yeah, and I
and
think
where they
people.
start.
Yeah, I think people forget that. There's a lot of soft skills that determine your success in any business career, right?
Mhm.
Like you think about the treasury department at a big multinational like that, right? There's a lot to managing the group of technicians.
Mhm.
And in public accounting, you develop those management oversight skills and the ability to coach and mentor and those kind of things that are ultimately important at the highest level, because they would have plenty of people that can do the derivatives and whatever it
Yeah.
is they're focused on, right? But he's just got to make sure, and not that he doesn't know how to do that too, but the reality of it is it's the ability to then communicate within the organization and all those kind of skills that you develop on the audit and tax side in our firm. And those skills, they know you have those skills earlier in your career, because you just wouldn't make it to manager in public
Yeah.
accounting if you can't do some of those things, right?
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about work-life flexibility. We touched upon that, but how do you manage work-life flexibility throughout your career? Because I do think there's a perception out there that there's busy season, or accountants just work, like 80 hours a week, and they're just really, really busy all the time. How do you manage? You have responsibilities outside the workplace. How do you manage your life?
Yeah, so I would go back to, that's the biggest reason, not the biggest, but one of the biggest reasons why I've stayed in public accounting, because when I looked at the other opportunities, I'm like, well, that's going to be, not that we work hard at times and we're not afraid of hard work, but I'm like, that is a consistent workload, right?
Unsustainable.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, in my deal right now, right? Like at the end of the day, like if you're doing a year-end audit and busy season, which you referenced, yeah, that's probably going to be 50, 60-hour weeks for about a month. But when that's coming. I mean,
Hmm.
companies report their results on a pretty regular basis, so you know exactly when those periods are coming. But even within those periods, it's still very project oriented. We're trying to get the audit done, and we obviously subdivide that into smaller projects. But each person has something they're responsible to do, but they have a timeline to do it. So even when you're really busy, there isn't. If you need to go do something, you've got total flexibility to do that, which I think is remarkable, because we don't have the downstream effect of like the CEO or CFO of a company saying, I need this tomorrow, which means everybody's got to marshal that. These audits are well planned. You know what you got to do, and you got due dates. And so if you need to do something personally, I mean, you can absolutely do that in the busiest time that we're working. And then the other times of the year, right? I mean, especially by the time you become a manager, you truly are. And that's like year 5 or 6 in the firm. You're truly managing stuff at that point,
Hmm.
right? And so if you need to go do something for a couple of days, I mean, you stay in contact with your people and you make sure they're doing what they need to do, but you don't have to do it. You don't have to be there. And I just don't know that many professions that early in your career you can get to the point where on a routine basis, most of your time is managing.
Yeah.
And when you're managing versus doing, that's where the flexibility comes in. But look, you got to you got to have your cell phone available, because when you do need to,
Hmm.
if the client calls, you need to at least be
You're a
able to talk to
professional.
them, right,
Yep.
and be a professional. But I've never had a client, even if they call with something that, okay, it's got to be done today or it's got to be done tomorrow. If you say, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to marshal a couple resources. We'll get started on it. Give us a couple days and we'll get back in touch, right? That's typically how we do it. And I think the profession lends itself to that. And that's why I think, even though at the end of the year, you may say you've worked quite a few hours, you have total flexibility within that construct.
And I think you would agree with this, right? One of the outcomes of the pandemic that was beneficial is the ability to work efficiently remotely.
Yes.
And before that, we weren't good at it. I don't think. I don't think we were good. We used a lot of FaceTime, but now we were forced to do it, and we're better at it. That allows you to marshal those resources, not just in the city in which you're working, but the country.
Yeah, firm wide.
And you can spread work around, so it
Exactly
helps
right.
with the peaks and valleys, right?
Exactly right. So
Yeah.
that is huge, and we got forced into that, but that is a huge byproduct of working through that because our clients have done the same thing too. So like when you think about most of our companies, they're the key people we deal with, they may be staggered days, but they're really only in their office 2 or 3 days a week, and so to get that FaceTime, by definition, you might go in one of those days, but you've gotten into a routine of they're used to doing Zoom meetings and
Hmm.
things like that, right? And people have figured out because again, everything we do now is digital, so all the work papers are
Hmm.
electronic. Like we bolt onto client systems, download a bunch of stuff, and then work with it. So we can do all of this remotely if you need to. It's good to be in, and it's good to be at the clients and get a little bit of FaceTime. But to your point, there was just I don't know, people just didn't believe it, and then we had no
Hmm.
choice, and now it works, and now it's a huge byproduct,
Yeah.
a huge positive byproduct of a really bad
Yeah,
situation.
I think the teams treat each other more professionally. Like you can be responsible for your. I don't have to watch you do it. You
Right.
can do it, and that degree of delivery and being good at it is just it's changed the way work is done.
No doubt.
Let's shift to compensation because that's one of the questions on young people's minds when they're thinking about what field of business do they want to go into. And I think the perception is that starting salaries for accounting are more slightly below that of other majors in the business world. I think firms are addressing that because they're going to be competitive. These
Yep.
firms are not going to not compete for talent. So, but I've tried to change the narrative a little bit to think more about your near-term compensation, not just day one and compare that because that's not going to stay static like that. So, what are you going to be making in 3 to 5 years? So, can you talk a little bit about both your experiences coming through the ranks and then the teams you work for, and just what have you seen on the compensation side in public accounting?
Yeah. So I think I think in full transparency, I would totally agree that we are still probably a little bit behind, but we have narrowed that gap when you think about starting salaries. But I think we felt like because we had this great experience to offer, we didn't have to
Hmm.
necessarily compete on the entry level. Because I do think when you get past the entry level, we're incredibly competitive. But so I think we've narrowed the gap a little bit on the entry level side. But I'll just say if you're kind of in the Midwest in a smaller town, let's just say that number's 75,000 now. It's probably 55 years ago. So
Yeah.
we've really upped that. But the most important thing, to the point you hit on, is our people each and every year they're working for us, even in a non-promotion year, they're going to get 5 or 10% raise because their experience allows us to charge more for them, so we can pay
Hmm.
them more. And so when you think about, starting somewhere for $20,000 or $30,000 more at the entry level, I guarantee you, in 3 to 5 years, we are at or beyond that. Now, that also people will say, well, yeah, but every time I hear somebody leaves, they always leave for more money. But my point there is because they're leaving for a job that's outside of the salary band because, 5 years experience in public accounting, you're going to get a job that would take somebody 10 years of experience if they just worked in the company. So, but again, I think the compensation is good. We have to compete for talent, to your point. But you're going to get 5 or 10% every year. And then when you get promoted, you're going to get, somewhere between 12, 13, and 20%, right? So these are good increases. So that Midwest guy I was talking about, or gal, starting at 70, they're probably going to be at 125 for sure by the time they're in their fifth year.
Yeah.
So, and I also think when you think about, they've also had, at least in my opinion, a pretty good work-life balance experience
Yes.
during that
You
period
got
of
to look at
time.
the total
You got
picture.
to look at the total picture for sure. And I think a lot of people that get these high salaries when they start, I mean, they're really grinding and working hard, and then they don't get the increases every year, right? So I think pretty quickly, and after about 5 years, I think you've kind of made up that balance. And as you know,
And
you're
you're extremely marketable at that time, like we're
unbelievably
saying,
marketable.
both to the firm that you're at, other firms, and
Yeah,
corporations.
you
Yeah.
got it. You're as marketable as you're, ever going to be or ever could be. And you were a partner in our firm, and you know that the compensation for partners is good. You're not gonna be that public company CEO rich guy, but you're gonna have plenty of ability to enjoy life. You can retire early. We have a nice
Yep.
pension. Average partner in today's environment, that's a seven-figure job,
Yep.
as we all know. So you're richly rewarded, but you also have, again, I go back to, especially when you factor in the work-life balance relative to that compensation. I just don't think there's a much
Yep.
better model out there.
Agree with you. Last topic. So besides just technical skills, accounting or tax or whatever, for a young aspiring accountant, what areas do you suggest them to focus on or practice while they're here at the university?
Yeah, so I think the other misnomer about the profession, right, is you think about an accountant, right, and you think, okay, they've got their head down on their computer doing whatever they do, and there's certainly an element of that. But what I tell everybody, if you go to a decent program, and obviously WashU is an elite program, you're going to have the technical skills that you will need.
Hmm.
You will never get out of this program without having those, right? And so most programs offer the kids the technical skills they
Hmm.
need, right? But what you need to be able to do the job well is we spend a lot of time. You got to interact with the client. Like, we these audits involve going through their business processes, and so you got to talk to, like, if you're going through the treasury function. We were talking about a friend of ours who is the treasurer of a big company. Well, he's got a whole organization of people, and they have a lot of processes around how they do their transactions. If you think about it, right, and the IT systems that support all that kind of stuff, we have to understand all that. And so you've got to go out and you've got to be able to communicate effectively with those people to get the answers that we need. And I tell people, like, some clients actually like the auditors, like to interact. Lots of people don't. So
They're leery.
you got to be able to communicate and drag that information out of them. And then you also have to be able to present it. You got to present it to your team, the people that are reviewing your work. And so that's a level of presentation skill. And then by the time you're a manager, you're likely sitting in an audit committee, and you're going to have to explain kind of how the audit's going to a board member. And so that's a level of communication skill that's a little bit different. And then we have to document everything. So being able to, to write and turn technical things into something that's clearly and concisely explained is a skill set. So I just think communication is the number one skill, both written and oral, and just having the willingness to do that is more important than the technical skills.
I agree with that. I think that skill of being able to take a very complicated matter, because you're not going to be asked a question by your partner or your manager or a client that's not hard, right?
Right.
If it was easy, they'd just answer the question themselves. So it's a complicated area. Take your research or whatever you did to find out the answer, distill that down into a meaningful, relatively short conversation or presentation is a skill that cannot be automated, can't be outsourced. That's what's really going to be, compensated well in your career.
Yeah, there's no question. And so that kind of hits just quickly on, like, if you think about Chat GPT
Hmm.
and AI, lots of people are using that, right? And if you get used to using, especially if you're in a profession, if you're an accountant or a lawyer, these are pretty good models. Like, you can put some stuff in and say, how should I account for this lease, right? But what's interesting is when you see the output, it's not right. It's got a lot of good stuff. So it's a great starting point, but that kind of stuff is never gonna circumvent the need for human review and interaction and understanding. Those tools will help people maybe do it a little more quickly, but you're still going to have to be the one that figures out how to edit even the output from something that's as good as that stuff is becoming. But it's
Yeah.
still not bulletproof.
And you mentioned writing. That's one of my goals here. Um, that ability to summarize something in a short email, again, distill it down that's actionable. Somebody can read
Yes.
it, appreciate the complexity. They don't need to be in the gory details, but understand it's important, and then be able to make a decision on it without it being 4 pages, 5 pages, because most things are read on a phone,
Right. Exactly. Right.
and you're not texting, right? This is a professional,
Right.
communication. And so I always try to tell students this is a safe place to start practicing that, your oral presentations, your written communications, and just get in the habit of doing that, because that's what's going to be expected of you in the business world.
Yeah.
It's what's going to be rewarded in the business world.
No, that's exactly right. And this, to your point, this is a safe place to do it. You got group projects, and you've got
Yeah, there's
opportunities to present, and
volunteering.
and
to do things.
volunteering is a good
Yeah.
way to do it. But any opportunity you can get to get in front of people speaking, or anytime you can, practice, doing a presentation where you're distilling, whatever the subject matter is, but you're going to give a presentation. So you got to have slides, and you're going to reduce it to small amount of bullet points to talk from. All that stuff will be really beneficial when you enter the business world, especially in public accounting.
And you never learn a subject better than when you're going to have to talk about it in
Exactly
front
right.
of people.
That's
you,
right.
You learn your stuff. So.
Yeah, agree with that.
Well, this has been fantastic, Phil. Really appreciate your thoughts, and it's been very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here and glad to participate.
Thanks.